Welcome to the Marble Odyssey settings tour. A few of our players have asked for some more information about what the settings exactly do. We've tried to add as many settings as we could to make your enjoyment of the game as good as possible. And some of the settings probably are a little bit complex and would benefit from more in-depth explanation, and something like tooltips probably wouldn't give you that. So that's what this video is for. So to get to the settings panel, just go down to the settings button here on the main title menu and press your button or your mouse button. So firstly, let's take a look at the audio controls. Over here we've got three sliders, and these are pretty simple in the way that they work. We have a master volume control, which affects all sounds in the game and the user interface. We have game effects, which is just the sound effects in the game itself. And then we have music. So if you want to play the game and you're not really interested in hearing the music, you can use this slider by pressing A with a joypad, turning down the sound of the music in the game, and then you'll play without music. If you find that the sound effects in the game are too loud, you can adjust it here, and if you find that all of the sound effects are too loud and for some reason you can't adjust it with your sound system, you've got the option of using the master slider to control your overall volume in-game and elsewhere in the user interface. Next, in the video section, we'll take a look at screen resolution and graphical quality and how these work together in concert to give you the main control that you have over the performance of the game. Generally, you want to be playing at 60 Hz, in other words 60 frames per second, because that means that when you move the joystick you get as little lag as possible between your intentions and the marble's action, and you'll get basically the best control of the marble, and you'll be able to play the game more easily. So the main control for getting a faster frame rate really is screen resolution, and the reason for this is that if you look at HD, which is 1920 by 1080 pixels, and if you compare that to 4K, that is a 4 times resolution increase, which means that the graphics card has to literally do 4 times as much work per frame to draw exactly the same image. Obviously a sharper image, but exactly the same image. So if you find that your game is suffering, your frame rate is very low, then the first thing you can try and do is change down to HD or a setting in between, or possibly even lower. We have quite a lot of settings here. These will vary depending on what your graphics card supports, so some of the resolutions that you see here may not be available. You may even have higher resolutions. So that's the first thing to look at when you find that you've got frame rate issues. As soon as you press the button on the controller, the screen resolution will change to that resolution, so it's a dynamic setting. The next main control of quality is graphical quality. So this needs some explanation. I can't really tell you about every single thing that this control changes, but if I actually change the values, you see the screen changing as I'm doing this, and that's because the quality of all of the settings in the entire game is being changed on the fly. When I put it down to low, so many things turn off. You can see that real-time shadows and real-time ambient occlusion, which is the shading that you get in the nooks and crannies of geometry, is off. Pretty much all the effects are off in low. So if you find that you have a relatively low specification machine, try playing the game to start off with low. Check out if you get 60 frames per second. If you do, bump it up to medium, keep on going up until eventually you'll find that your frame rate drops below 60 frames per second in game, and at that point you know you need to drop down to the next best quality level. Personally, the development machine for Marble Odyssey has an NVIDIA 1080 Ti, which is not the latest technology, and that was done for a reason. It's so that it represents more of the hardware that's out there in the real world with most users. And I find that my machine basically can handle Ultra, which is the maximum graphical quality, in either HD or 2560 by 1440. You may find things are different for you. If you have a faster machine with one of the later generations of NVIDIA, especially later this year, new graphics cards are coming out, so you'll probably find if you have one of those, you can run the game at 4K with Ultra and you have a perfectly good frame rate. So mileage may vary, but these are the two controls that you really want to go to start off to try and get your basic quality fine-tuned. And the next two settings are anti-aliasing related. So anti-aliasing is the technology that basically tries to make the steps that you see in diagonal lines or curves drawn with pixels, you'll see stepping, and anti-aliasing will use different shades of the color to try and create the illusion that basically that is a much smoother curve. And anti-aliasing is something that's been around for a long time, back into the 80s, and obviously with modern GPUs it's done on the fly. Our game supports two different main algorithms and also the ability to turn it on and off completely. So if you want to turn off anti-aliasing completely, you can just do it there. And by default, when it's on, it uses fast approximate anti-aliasing, which is generally good enough, to be honest. Our engine does support temporal anti-aliasing, and you can turn it on using this button here. You basically just need to try the two different algorithms and see what you get, and just basically choose the algorithm or completely turn off anti-aliasing. For instance, if your game is running at 4K, you may find that you don't really need anti-aliasing, and it slows down the rendering ever so slightly, and you'd rather get some more frames per second. So the choice is yours with these two settings. Next, we're going to look at the visual effects section, and we have basically 3 special effects here, but 4 controls, so because 2 of them are actually related to the first special effect. So real-time reflections are used on marbles in the game, and they are pretty taxing on both the CPU and the GPU. You can see that we have 2 controls here, so let me just explain what these 2 do. This basically allows you to turn off real-time reflections completely if you want to, and this setting here controls how frequently the game tries to update the real-time reflection. Now, real-time reflection would ideally be an exact match for the frame rate, the main frame rate of the game, but to be honest, that's actually not really achievable on many people's machines. So you can see that if you can think about this slide as being 100% on the right and 0% on the left, it doesn't actually quite work like that. Basically on the left it will do 1 update, I think it is per second, which to be honest doesn't look so good. You probably want at least 1 update every half a second or every third of a second. And on the right it will try and do 60 updates per second, which is pretty difficult to achieve. So that may not work on your machine. You can try it out. For you, you may find that you don't care about like particle effects or anti-aliasing, so you might want to turn those off, and instead you might want to crank up your real-time reflection rate. And the last 2 effects are particle effects and volume lights. So particle effects are used in the game for various things, and again you may find that your machine struggles with particle effects. The graphical quality settings over here actually does try to tone down the amount of particles, and I believe in low quality will actually turn them off, but your mileage may vary. So if you find that your machine is struggling to render particle effects, you've got the checkbox here to turn it off completely. And the last setting here is volume lights. So volume lights are the kind of lighting that you would see around a street light on a foggy evening, on a misty evening. It's where the atmosphere itself gets lit up by light as it shines through it. Looks really nice. Some of the levels use it, mainly nighttime levels, just to give a bit of extra atmosphere. But you may find that your machine again struggles with it, or you may not really like the effect. So again, you've got the option here of using this checkbox to turn off volume lighting in game.